JoJo's Bizarre Adventures is an absolute icon of a series that's been coming out longer than many of us have been alive. It's an extremely influential anime that shows no sign of slowing down even after all these decades. JoJo's is one of my personal favorite anime of all time, and with part 7 around the corner, I thought I would rewatch the whole series from the beginning to confirm if it's as good as I remember. Now, anyone who's watched JoJo's knows that it's unconventional. To say that this series is random is an understatement. However, that's the beauty of JoJo's. It's random, it's fun, it's hype, but most importantly, and not only that, but it also has a lot of aspects from the past. You can really tell which time period each part was influenced by and how it affects both the art and the story. But nonetheless, let's get into probably the most messiest beginning to a series, JoJo's Part 1, Phantom Blood. First impressions are very important. It's the first thing people see and judge. If I started this video talking about lawnmowers and how lawnmowers are pretty cool, you know, they cut grass and shit, then you probably would have clicked off the video. And I'm sure a lot of people did the exact same thing with JoJo's. Because to put it lightly, JoJo's first impression is horrible. The first episode of the series definitely sets up what it needs to, but how do I say this? About 6 episodes worth of things happen in the first episode alone. In the first episode, you have JoJo's family almost dying, with Jonathan and his father getting saved by Dio's father with the exception of the deceased mother. Then time skip to Dio's father on his deathbed telling Dio to live with the Joestars, which he does. We then get introduced to a couple characters, Erina, Danny the dog, Jonathan. See, at this point everything is fine, but then Dio starts terrorizing Jonathan, making him lose all his friends and making his life miserable. He's constantly getting compared to Dio by his family and everyone in town, you know, for not having enough manners or not being able to beat up Dio in a fight. And as well, Dio makes everyone believe that Jonathan is a motherfucking snitch. However, not all is lost, because he then gets together with Erina and they have a very nice relationship where he's finally happy after all this time. But then Dio forces himself onto Erina, stealing her first kiss, which makes her unable to face Jonathan. Of course, Jonathan finds out about this and starts beating the absolute shit out of Dio, with some foreshadowing sprinkled in. And as Dio is about to, I guess, kill Jonathan, they get stopped and now Dio has to rethink his plans. Did I miss anything? Oh yeah, Dio also kills Danny the dog. When watching the first episode, everything feels at 2x speed. It's as if they want to skim over all the boring parts and get straight into the meat and juices JoJo's is known for. But man, this episode is objectively very bad. Now, of course, on my rewatch, because I knew how everything would go and where the story would end up, I found myself having a lot of fun with the first episode just because of how insane and chaotic it was. Fortunately, the whole season isn't like this. The next episode and onwards has pretty consistent pacing. While it's not the greatest pacing, things still go pretty fast. It's a lot better than the first episode. I still lay awake at night thinking about it sometimes. How does this episode even exist? Why is this such an outlier compared to the rest of the series? It's one of those things that'll haunt me for the rest of my life. The actual story of JoJo's I did enjoy. I found that the concept was good. Having this rivalry between polar opposites, one a straightforward guy with a heart of gold and a cold, cunning, manipulative guy who would do anything to accomplish his own goals. I thought it was neat. It's been done before and there's a reason it works. And since we're on this topic, Dio 100% carries this season on his back. He's the most interesting character in the arc and he steals every scene he's in. And it's a given seeing as he's arguably the most important character in all of JoJo's. If you've watched JoJo's, then you know that this guy is just straight up evil. They do show his abusive father and all that, but they never try and make him a sympathetic character, which honestly we need every now and then. Sometimes we need a guy that's like, you know what? Let me just start killing dogs. Rip Danny the dog, man. He died too young, but he was a necessary sacrifice to ensure that no one else met his fate. Jonathan is alright. I don't have much to say about him because he has a very straightforward personality. He's definitely the worst protagonist in the series because every other JoJo simply just gaps him in everything, whether it be entertainment wise or character wise. He serves his purpose in being the complete opposite of Dio, but that in turn also makes him kinda boring to watch. I couldn't really tell you much about him besides he has really high morals and he's just a really good guy. Even when he dies in the end, I didn't feel anything because I didn't really have a connection to him in the first place. Well, actually I didn't have a connection to anyone besides Dio. And I guess Speedwagon as well. Simply because it's Speedwagon. Whenever a character you've met dies, you're kind of just like, huh, okay. There are a couple reasons for this. One, this part is very short. It's only 9 episodes long, and a lot of characters we meet don't show up until a bit before half of the part. So we're only given a couple episodes with them, which isn't enough time to get us to care about them. And as well, the pacing, while better than the conundrum that is the first episode, it still moves very quickly. It's almost as if the animators wanted to skim through this part and get into the infinitely more entertaining part 2. I don't know much about the manga, I'm strictly an anime only, so I have no idea if this part was rushed or if it's actually just this fast. See, it's weird to think about because of how much the series changes over time, but it's easy to forget like, oh yeah, JoJo's used to be about beating up vampires. I feel that the reputation of JoJo's to everyone is always about, you know, the stands or the memes and out of context scenes. So to someone who's going into this semi-blind with the expectation of this is what you're going to get, I can see people being disappointed. I hear it's pretty common to skip this part and also part 2, which sounds outrageous to me, but I'll talk about that more when I get to part 2. In my opinion, I'd say even though this isn't the most logical piece of advice, don't go into JoJo's part 1 expecting to like it because most people won't. Instead, try to see the potential the series has. I guarantee even if you don't like Phantom Blood, you can see that the series has more to offer than what it's currently showing you. So don't take part 1 too seriously, it's simply way too messy to get fully invested in what's going on. But it is as entertaining as it can be for a piece of media you're not fully invested in. Okay, so I got a bit sidetracked. Vampires. JoJo's part 1 is inspired by a lot of things, and as well the whole series is inspired by Western culture. So you can probably tell that Phantom Blood specifically has a lot of inspiration for Dracula and also action 80s stars like your Sylvester Stallones and Arnold Schwarzeneggers. For the beginning of the series, I'd say having vampires as the central obstacle for a story about a family's generation being told from the perspective of the different descendants was a pretty good idea. And part 1 does a good job of making the vampires feel like a force of nature. It's actually something part 1 does better than part 2. The vampires feel extremely threatening in Phantom Blood. It really feels like if they're left unchecked for too long, they could take over the world relatively easily. So the way they use vampires in the series is one of the highlights, and as well because Dia was a vampire. Basically anything that's related to Dia was good. Harmon, the power system for JoJo's, is alright. In the grand scheme of things, it feels really basic. It doesn't feel any different to any other power system in terms of structure. Basically have really good control over your breathing and you'll be able to create life energy in a similar vein to sunlight, which is the natural enemy to vampires. Harmon works for the time being, but it was very clear that you could only go so far with it. And the way Jonathan uses it makes sense with his character. He's a very straightforward person, so his Harmon is also very straightforward. It's a solid introduction to Harmon, but I feel as if even still, it wasn't explained well enough. I feel they could have spent a bit more time explaining how it works. It definitely feels like they skimmed over some of the aspects and just assumed we'd understand. The ending of part 1 was great. Despite what I said about not caring about Jonathan's death, it was still shocking. It definitely set an expectation for what the rest of the series is going to be like. Basically, important characters will die throughout the series, and the rest of JoJo's definitely delivers on that. I'm still confused as to how Dio survived. I get that he was in a coffin or something, but I swear there was only one coffin and Arena was in that one. That's another thing that keeps me awake at night. But besides that, there's not really much else to say. In my opinion, it was a solid introduction to the series. While by no means perfect, it did its job. Kinda. Honestly, the whole of part 1 is such a puzzle to me because this is the only part that feels incomplete. This part specifically had a lot of potential to genuinely be a good season of anime, but it just has so many glaring flaws that makes it way too messy and unfocused. It had a nice idea, but without the time to get to know these characters and form a connection to them, it just feels like extra fluff. Which is insane because it's the beginning of the series, which should mean it's arguably one of the most important parts of JoJo's, but it just doesn't feel like it. I can understand why people would also recommend to skip this part because it feels almost unnecessary to watch. You will get most of the context needed in the later parts to understand what is going on. But does that mean you should skip part 1? Honestly, no. I feel that despite all its shortcomings, it's still important to see the evolution into the series. I feel that skipping this part feels like a disservice to JoJo's, and it's still alright. I personally don't think part 1 of JoJo's is bad. I think it's a very messy and chaotic season, but it's still entertaining enough to get me to keep watching. Now, to question whether or not my opinions of part 1 has changed on rewatch, I can safely say that it's the exact same. It feels the same, I have the same issues I had with it all those years ago, and also like the same parts as well. I guess the only exception was that I kinda liked the first episode more, but that was less to do with the quality of the episode and more to do with the fact I knew what I was getting myself into. Whereas on my first watch, I was genuinely baffled by what I was watching. So I guess my overall opinion is slightly better. I'd still say Phantom Blood is around a 6 out of 10, but it's only 9 episodes. I just really wish it was a bit longer and more fleshed out. Hey guys, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, giving a like would be greatly appreciated, and if you're new here, subscribing would mean a lot. That's the first video of my rewatch as I journey through the next parts of JoJo's. A big bulk of this video was negative, however, that was just my own honest opinions. I can safely say that it won't stay like this as I have finished part 2 and I am cruising through part 3 at the moment. So spoiler alert, these parts are way better than part 1. But anyways, that's all I have to say for now. See ya.